By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. What's that talking about?
She hung the scarf in the window.
Yeah, so this is when we're going back to Numbers 12 and 13, when the 12 spies came in. They're also called angels or messengers. Let me show you that in the book of James. So we go over to James chapter 2. I think it's in 2. 25. So James 2:25, likewise was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers? Now that is the Greek word angelos, which is angels, the English equivalent to angels. So the term angel just means messenger. That's all it means. When the angels, she received the angels, the messengers, and sent them out another way. Brett, I don't know if you can get the Young's literal online, but I think it may say angels there.
Well, I was, right now, at the moment, I was looking at Numbers, and it says men.
Yes, they were men. They were the messengers.
One of each tribe.
One from each tribe. And they were to go in and spy out the land. So that's why here it says spies. She received the spies, but these spies, they were spies on behalf of one group, but they were angels on behalf of another group. They were the messengers. They were to bring back the message.
Yeah, it's interesting how that word is interchangeable, right? You see it sometimes with heavenly messengers, spiritual beings, and then you just see it as for men too, could be called angels.
Yeah, men can be called angels, and they are called that. You have the messengers of the churches in
Revelation,
Corinthians,
Revelation too.
which is in Revelation, the first 3 chapters, the messengers, which I think were the preachers of the 7 churches, of which Timothy was the preacher or the messenger at the church at Ephesus. So, anyways, that's neither here nor there. But these spies, it goes back to Numbers 12 and or 13 and 14, where they went into the land, and they went into the land for 30 days, and they came back out. And do you remember what they told the people? The majority of the spies, there were 10 of the spies who said, we cannot take the land. And then Joshua and Caleb, the other 2, said, yes, we can. Let's go in right now. We can take it. That caused a big, big issue. Go back and read the book of Numbers. And you'll have the prophetical background for these statements that we find about these people in the New Testament. So that was a big deal. And so Caleb and Joshua are like, yeah, we can go in and take the land. God has given it to us. We can do it. And the other 10 said, no, we can't. And there was an uproar among the people. And the people believed the majority instead of the minority. And they said, nope, we're not going to go in the land. And then God pronounced a curse on them. And all those people, every single one of them, except Caleb and Joshua, died in the wilderness. All of the original generation, except for Caleb and Joshua, died in the wilderness because God had sworn in his wrath that they would not enter his rest. Remember that? Hebrews chapter 4. So here she received the spies with peace, and her faith was accounted to her for righteousness, and she was saved when they went in to Jericho. So we have, here's your verb, received. There's your verb. There's always a verb there when it talks about your faith, because your faith is your action. Your faith moves you to action. So she received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, Samson, Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued, there's your verb again, kingdoms, worked, there's your verb again, righteousness, obtained promises, there's your verb again, stopped, there's your verb, the mouth of lions. What's that referring to? When you stop the mouth of lions, who was that?
So Daniel.
Yeah, that was Daniel. That's who he's referring to. Quench the violence of fire. Okay, there's your verb again. Who was that?
It's
Connected to this up here.
Daniel.
Huh?
Back to Daniel.
Yeah, back
his
to
friends.
Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or however you pronounce that. So they were thrown into the fiery furnace, and the furnace was heated like 7 times hotter than it was originally, and it actually killed the men who threw them in because it was so hot the flames leaked out. Talk about a miracle. So they quenched the violence of fire. That is absolutely the fiery furnace in Daniel. Escape the edge of the sword. That could be referring to the prophets, such as Elijah. Remember the 450 prophets of Baal? They were going to kill Elijah. And he said, "Oh Lord, they've killed all your prophets, and I alone am left, and they seek my life also." Remember that? Good morning, good morning.
Maybe Isaiah too. On the
So, and then what did Elisha do? Remember the story? He made a trench, made an altar, dug a trench around it, put wood in it, doused it with water. Does wet wood burn? No. He doused it with water,
And then doused with water.
and then I think he did it 3 times, right?
Kept dousing.
Yeah. To make sure the wood was wet and it's not going to light through natural means. And that's the key, through natural means. It'll light through supernatural means, but not natural. And then the prophets of Baal did that. He said, look, whoever's God sets this on fire, that's the true God. And remember the prophets of Baal, all day they hooted and hollered and chanted and danced around and nothing happened. And Elijah's like, well, maybe your God is asleep. Maybe you ought to get louder to rouse him from his sleep. And so they're, now they're all boogieing around their altar trying to get their God, Baal, to, nothing happened. Then they cut themselves, and then Elijah just kind of like, okay, Lord, right? It comes down, takes care of it, burns up. Burned up so bad it evaporated all the water. So this is probably Elijah here. Maybe. I don't know. Escape the edge of the sword. Out of weakness we're made strong. Who is that? Who was the strongest man in the Bible?
Samson.
Samson. Out of weakness he was made strong. Who became valiant in battle? Well, Samson, but there was another man.
David.
King David. And King David was such a man of war that God did not want him to build the temple because he had shed so much blood. So Solomon built the temple. So this is probably referring to David, and I would say Samson. turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Of course, that is David and Samson. And then women receive their dead raised to life again. That is, I believe that's found in 2 Kings, and let me see if I have a footnote here. Hold on just a second. That is verse 35. So 1 Kings 17:22. Let's go over there. 1 Kings 17:22. Let's go back to verse 17. Elijah. 1 Kings 17:17. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick, and his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him. And so she said to Elijah, "What have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?" He said to her, "Give me your son." So he took him out of her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his own bed. So this must have been a smaller child. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodged by killing her son?" And he stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, I pray, let this child's soul come back to him." And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came back to him, and he revived. And then Elijah took the child and presented him to his mother. So, when we have women received their dead, I believe that's exactly the scripture that the Hebrew writer is referring to. All right, any comments on that? So others, then this is all by faith. This is all by faith. Others were tortured. Now, you think about torture for a minute, and you think about all the very, very bad things that people do to one another in torture. And you go back, I don't think man has changed much at all since then. Probably not at all. Now, we don't know what the torture was exactly, but we do know some of the torture methods that they used, and especially some of the torture methods they used in the 14 and 1500s during the Dark Ages. And it was the Dark Ages because the Bible had not, 1400s, had not really come to light and been translated into the common language of the people yet. So they were tortured, whatever this torture was. What does it take? So someone comes up to you and says, "Deny the faith, or I'm going to do A, B, and C. I'm going to slowly cut your head off." What do you do? When you read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, what I would do if I were you is I would go on Amazon or go to the Bible bookstore, but it's going to be quicker to go to Amazon, and buy the Apocrypha. You ever heard of that? The Apocrypha, it used to be part of when the King James Version came out, they included the Apocrypha in that version of the Bible. Did you know that? If you didn't, you can Google it. I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you the truth. And so since that time, it's been taken out. Now, the reason I say you need to get the Apocrypha and read it is because it has a lot of Jewish history in between the testaments. It's called intertestamental history. Did I say that right, Scott?
I think it's intertestamental or.
Yeah, anyway, between
Like
the
that,
testaments,
yeah.
between Malachi and Matthew. All right, so it's not sinful to read that. I'm not saying that it's scripture because I don't believe it is, but it is. There's a lot of good information in there. And in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, you're going to read about these people being tortured to death. Now, some of the torture there was done by a man called Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a Greek general of Alexander the Great, and he came to power in the land about 163 BC. And he came in, according to the book of Daniel, and you'll read about that in Daniel 10 and 11. He came in and he started wreaking havoc in the land of the Jews. He came in, destroyed the temple, not demolished it, but he tore it up, and he offered a pig on the altar, and Daniel calls that the abomination of desolation. Now that would occur again because that was typological, but it would occur again in the time of Jesus, the time of the apostles, Matthew 24. So during this time of Antiochus Epiphanes, which you read about in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Now Maccabee was a Jewish family who rose up and revolted against Antiochus. And he won. His revolt won. And you get the celebration of the Jews of Hanukkah, the light ceremony. I don't know exactly what Hanukkah means. Something has to do with lights. Festival of Lights. You get that from the Maccabees. That was in celebration of them rising up against Antiochus and kicking him out of the land and destroying him and reestablishing Jewish worship in Jerusalem. So you get the Festival of Lights, or also known as Hanukkah, from this. Now, under the Maccabean revolt, they were tortured. And there is an account, I believe, I may be wrong, but I think it's in either 1st or 2nd Maccabees, but I do know that it's in the Apocrypha, where a woman had several children, and Antiochus killed her children in front of her, and then killed her lastly, so that she would be tortured. So I'm just saying that others were tortured. It could include this time frame in the Jewish history. So they were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they may obtain a better resurrection. Now, here is where we get into fulfillment. All right? And everybody's like, yeah, the good stuff here. The better resurrection. So, let's stop and look at this for just a moment. I have to ask the question, and the answer is going to be yes. Did the Old Testament prophets speak of a resurrection that was to come?
Yes.
Yes. If that is the case,
Yes, he told you.
then we have to ask, what is the nature of that Old Covenant resurrection? First of all, where is it? Well, let me take you to Isaiah. And I want to state that every time, now this is extremely important, this is how we win arguments against the futurists. Excuse me. So I want you to listen carefully to what I'm going to say. Every time in the Old Testament that resurrection is mentioned by the prophets, every time without exception, it is always mentioned in the context of the fall of Jerusalem. Does everyone understand what I mean? I'm going to show you this. All right, we're going to take some time. We may be 3 or 4 weeks before we get to verse 36. That's okay. I'm going to take some time. So I'm going to say it again. Every time that the Old Testament prophets mention resurrection, when they prophesy about the resurrection that was to come, it is always in the context of the fall of Jerusalem. Now I want to show you. So when you go to Isaiah, chapter 24, look at Isaiah 24. Isaiah 24, 25, actually Isaiah 24 through 29 is a complete context. There's a context to all of those chapters. And the scholars call that the little apocalypse. All right? Because from Isaiah 24 to Isaiah 29, it talks about the fall of the city. So I'm going to set this up. But when we get into chapter 25 and 26, it talks about resurrection. Well, the resurrection that was to come was in the context of the fall of Jerusalem. So let's watch this. In Isaiah 24 and 1, behold, the Lord makes the earth empty. And that word earth there is land. He makes it waste, distorts its surface, and scatters abroad its inhabitants. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priests. Okay. This is talking about Israel. Now some people are going to argue, oh, no. Well, wait a minute. Who had the priest? That's the Levitical priesthood. Do you see that in verse 2? As with the people, so with the priest. As with the servant, so with his master. As with the maid, so with her mistress. As with the buyer, so with the seller. As with the lender, so with the borrower. As with the creditor, so with the debtor. Everyone is going to be treated equally. Look at verse 3. The land shall be entirely emptied and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken his word. Now let's keep reading. The haughty people of the earth, that's Israel. They became haughty through their idolatry. They were puffed up. The haughty people of the earth languish. The earth, that's the land, is also defiled under its inhabitants. That's because of their idolatry. And watch this. Because they have transgressed the laws. That's the old covenant law. And changed the ordinance and broken the everlasting covenant. Now that right there tells you this is speaking about the Jews. This is not the Gentiles. Now our opponents would say, well, this is talking about some other Gentile nation. No, it's not, because it mentions the priest in verse 2, and in verse 5 it mentions the everlasting covenant. God only had one everlasting covenant, and only with one group of people ever. And what was that people? That's Israel. So verse 2, the priest. Verse 5, the everlasting covenant. This is Israel. It's talking about Israel. Look what he says in verse 6. Therefore the curse has devoured the earth. That's the curse of the old covenant law. If you sin, you will die. If you don't obey me, I'm going to wipe you out. That's Deuteronomy 28. So the curse has devoured the earth. Those who dwell in it are desolate. That's Israel. Therefore the inhabitants of the, it should say the land, are burned, and few men are left. Now notice, God is going to destroy their heaven and their earth. Look at verse 18 and 19. First he says in verse 4 that the earth, the land mourns and fades away, and the world languishes and fades away. That's the destruction of the Jewish heaven and the Jewish earth. Verse 18, go to verse 18. Look at the last part of the verse. and the foundations of the earth are shaken. That's the destruction of the Jewish heaven and earth. Look at verse 19. The earth is violently broken. The earth is split open. The earth is shaken exceedingly. Look at verse 20. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall totter like a hut. Its transgression shall be heavy upon it. It will fall and not rise again. This is Old Covenant Israel. Underline that. It will fall. Their covenant, their heaven and earth, their world will fall and not rise again. Israel was doomed. Now, let's keep reading. I'm going to take some time. Just humor me. Verse 21, or in Isaiah 24:21. It shall come to pass in that day. What day? When Israel falls and not rise again, that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones. That's the leaders of Israel. And on the earth, the kings of the earth. That's the leaders of Israel. So what you have is that you have a Hebraic parallelism here. I want you to notice that the host, in verse 21, the host of exalted ones are equal and parallel to the kings of the earth. Do you see that? When you see that in your Bible, that is called a Hebraic parallelism. And that's the way that the Hebrews would say something over again in order for emphasis. Okay, so that the host of the exalted ones are nothing more than the kings of the earth. I want you to see that in the text. Look at verse 22. They will gather together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and they will be shut up in the prison. That's the city, because God's going to destroy it. And after many days, they will be punished. The siege was 5 months in 87. 5 months. Then, watch this. The moon will be disgraced, the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts will reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. That's the heavenly Jerusalem. And before his elders, gloriously. Now, that brings us into chapter 25. Now, let's just take a minute and look at chapter 25. O Lord, you are my God. I will exalt you. I will praise your name, for you have done wonderful things. Your counsels of old are faithfulness and truth, for you have made a city a ruin, a fortified city a ruin. What is that talking about? It's the same thing. It's the continuation of chapter 24, where he tells them it would fall, their heaven and earth would fall and not rise again. God would punish Israel for her sin in the last days. And now he says in verse 2, you have made his city a ruin. And what city is in view in this context? It's the city of the priest and the everlasting covenant. Do we see that? Okay, what city is the priest and the everlasting covenant? That's Israel. That's Jerusalem. So, he says, you have made a city a ruin, verse 25 and 2, chapter 25 and 2. A fortified city a ruin, that's Jerusalem. A palace of foreigners, to be a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. So here, Judaism is eternally destroyed. Now, let's keep reading. It will never be rebuilt. Where's the temple today? Where's the Jewish temple today?
It's not there.
It's not there. God says it will never be rebuilt.
Just a part of a wall that a lot of people cry at.
It's interesting, some
Don't
of
make
the,
me cough, Brett.
some of the chaos that's happened when they've tried to rebuild it, like in history, like big earthquakes that were killing all the workers, and the workers were like, we're done. And wars, as soon as they started, like
Yeah.
countries coming in and invading them, so.
God said it will never be rebuilt.
Yeah,
Okay,
they got a mosque sitting there right now.
yeah,
like, there's- yeah.
the Muslims own the Temple Mount right now, so if they tried to do something, they're gonna start World War III. So, good luck with that.
Yeah.
So, notice verse 4, for you have been a strength to the poor, a strength to the needy in his distress. That's the righteous remnant. Now, let's come down to verse 6 for the sake of time. Maybe I shouldn't, but we're going to. Look at verse 6. And in this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all people a feast of choice pieces, a feast of wines on the lees, of fat things full of marrow, of well-refined wines on the lees. That's in Mount Zion. But watch this. Verse 7. And he will destroy on this mountain, that's Mount Zion, the surface of the covering cast over all the people, the veil that is spread over all nations. Now stop for just a moment. This is the death veil. And it was common, it's even common today, when we have a dead body in law enforcement, there's a veil, a sheet that goes over the body. Now they go in body bags. All right. But back then, it was accustomed to put a veil over the body. When a person died, due to dignity and respect for the dead, they would veil the body. So they would put a sheet. It was called the death veil over the body. All right. And this is what he's talking about here. Isaiah 25:7, he will destroy on this mountain the surface of the covering cast over all people. That's the death veil. So death, at some point in their future, death was going to be destroyed. Do we see that? Look what he says. And the veil that is spread over all nations. Well, when you get to Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2, Paul is making a case, especially when you get into chapter 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory. That's Jew and Gentile. So the death veil that sin brought covered both Jew and Gentile. And this death veil that killed the Jew is along with the Gentile. Because the law of the garden is you sin, you die. And the day that you sin, or the day that you eat, you're going to surely die. So this is what he's talking about here. He says the veil that's spread over all the nations. Now, so Paul, in the book of Romans, makes the case that all have sinned. The Jews have sinned. They sinned against the law. The Gentiles have sinned against natural law, their conscience, right? Because God has, everyone knows it's wrong to kill. It's wrong to murder. It's wrong to steal. It's wrong to take another man's wife. It's wrong to plunder a man's goods. So God has put it inherently in man, in our conscience. That is the law of nature. So the Gentiles, not having the law of Moses, they sinned against the law of nature. They sinned against their own conscience. Does that make sense? You read Romans 2 and verse 12. That's exactly what Paul is teaching. That the Jews sinned against the law of Moses, but the Gentiles sinned against the law of nature. They were both sinners. They were both condemned. Thus, the death veil is spread over all the nations because all have sinned. Now, they haven't sinned against the same thing because the Jews had the law of Moses and the Gentiles had their law of conscience, or the law of nature, that guided their conscience. But if the Jew killed and the Gentile killed, unrighteously, of course, they both committed the same act of violence and the same act of sin. So therefore they have both sinned. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's well said.
Now, look at verse 8, and we're going to stop here. Verse 8. He says, he will swallow up death forever, and the Lord will wipe away tears from all faces. The rebuke of his people he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken. That's resurrection, folks. That is resurrection from the dead. And it's not a physical body that is to be resurrected. It is a spiritual body coming out of the realm of death, which is the Hadean realm. In the Old Covenant, they called it Sheol, the pit, the grave. It's the unseen abode of the dead. The Greek equivalent to Sheol is Hades. It's also pronounced Hades or Hades, just depending on the Greek or the English. So you have people in the Hadean realm, in Sheol, the grave, the pit, the depths. And that is going to be done away with. There's going to be a resurrection from the grave. Not from the literal dirt, but from the grave of Sheol. From the grave of Hades, where the dead are kept. You see, your body goes back into the dirt. You were made from the dirt, and God told Adam, from dirt you were made, to dirt you shall go back, right? So it's not the body coming out of the ground, it's the soul coming out of Hades. And God is going to, when he says the Lord there in verse 8, he's going to swallow up death forever. That's covenantal death that's brought upon all men because of sin. And the Lord will wipe away the tears from all the faces. That's covenantal in its nature. He's not talking about physical tears. He's talking about covenantal tears. They were in tears because they were under a covenant that could not provide true forgiveness and redemption. But once true forgiveness and redemption is obtained through the blood of Christ, now there's no more tears. I don't cry in the new covenant. I cry in my physical body, but there's nothing in the new covenant to cry over. There was in the old covenant, because they were in a system that stuck them in under the penalty of sin and death, and they could not get out from under it. Is it too cold?
It's freezing.
Okay, all you gotta do is tell me. I was afraid it was gonna be too hot. Sorry, Cindy.
It's okay.
Let me shut this down.
I don't want to interrupt you.
All right,
Just
so we're
tell
done.
him when you quit, then ask him if we can turn off the fan. It's okay.
All right. So here is one of the times that resurrection is mentioned by one of the Old Testament prophets. All right. What's the context? The fall of the city. All right. Now just keep that in mind when you start to discuss this with a family member or a friend. You can take them to Isaiah and show them, look, the context of resurrection in the Old Testament prophets is in the context of the fall of Jerusalem. Now we're going to see this next week. I'm going to develop this some more. We're going to look at chapter 26. Chapter 26 is in the context of the fall of the city. And then we'll look at Daniel 12. Well, of course, Daniel 12 is in the context of the fall of the city. And then we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 15. And Paul gets his quote in 1 Corinthians 15 out of the Old Testament context of the fall of the city. Okay, any other comments? Questions? All right, so we'll end there and we'll pick up actually in verse 9 of Isaiah 25 and we'll go into chapter 26.